After using this Nintendo Switch 2 since the release of the console and coming back to the Steam Deck OLED, I just feel like there's a couple of things that we have to talk about the Steam Deck as compared to the Nintendo Switch. This is not a versus between the two, rather things that I noticed about the Steam Deck OLED after using the Nintendo Switch. A couple of things that just really stood out to me when using this handheld PC. So the Steam Deck OLED, in my opinion, is still one of the best, if not the best, gaming handheld console slash PC out there on the market. And there's a big reason to it. I feel like there's a couple things that just made it so obvious once I got the hang of the Switch 2, which I didn't really take in consideration too much before it. But now that I've been able to play with that and came back to the Steam Deck OLED, I have to say that there's a couple of things that are just really incredible on the Steam Deck OLED. First off is the ease of use. There's a little bit of a difference, but the Steam Deck OLED for a PC, a handheld PC, it feels like a console. Like for everyday user, not for those that are gonna really play around with it or really use the PC mode, it really feels like a really easy to use handheld console. It's really easy to set up, easy to play with, everything just works out of the box pretty much. The setup was minimal, and you can use it like a traditional handheld console. Turn on and off, it's already off, you can continue where you left off, it just feels like a Nintendo Switch. As compared to the handhelds that are based on the Windows 11, this is definitely much more of a console-like experience. So if you're looking for something that can play PC games but play like a console, this is incredible. Another thing that I noticed is that while the Steam Deck OLED can be used like a hybrid and other handheld PCs can be used like a hybrid, the Nintendo Switch 2 is much more of a hybrid console than the Steam Deck is. It just makes it super easy to set up, super easy to play. You just put it into your dock and it's right away the way it should be. The Steam Deck and other handheld PCs are just not made, in my opinion, as much as a hybrid console. You can use them for sure, but there is more things to do to really set it up. You know, even just the idea that you have the controllers here, that you just take them off and you can play with them, where here you have to have a separate controller, and that controller has to be connected. And then there's all those different things that you have to do before you can actually play, and even setting the resolution or everything. Well, this, out of the box, put it into the dock and it works. So as a hybrid console, the Nintendo Switch 2 is a much better pick in my opinion. Where the Steam Deck and handheld PCs in general, well, they can do that, but I just feel like I mainly see them as a handheld gaming device rather than a hybrid. But I know people use them. It is just what I felt like when I used the two side by side. With the Nintendo Switch being a pretty much like a flat tablet on the back, it is better than the Nintendo Switch 1 and the Nintendo Switch OLED. It just, the shape of it, everything is just much better than it was, and it feels pretty good in hand in my opinion. There is just nothing that really at this moment is as ergonomic and just perfectly made for a hand than the Steam Deck OLED. Like seriously, this is the most ergonomic, made for hands, made for a human hand as possible. The grips on the back are definitely really good. You can really hold it nicely. The buttons, everything is really nice. And even the analog sticks being on top make it that this is where your hands actually go. Like if I was to hold this like a slab of, a rock, this is where my hands would naturally fall into place. And this is where the hands are. Where on the Nintendo Switch, it's much lower, meaning that for many games, it's just uncomfortable, especially those that you want to have as much precision in controls. So in my opinion, this, both front and the back, is just so comfortable. And after playing with the Nintendo Switch 2 for a little bit, and just forgetting about the grip and the ergonomics, coming back to this just felt like this is incredible. Like this just feels incredible in hand, much more ergonomic, much more just comfortable to play with, and just better to use. And then the last thing is the games. This plays PC games, especially those from the Steam library. You can get games from different launchers. I do have from Epic Launcher, for example, but overall you're probably limited to a set game of games. Same thing with the Nintendo Switch 2, you're limited to whatever is available on Nintendo Switch 1 and 2. But there is one key difference that I've just thought about when playing around with this too. First is the prices, but there's also a second argument, which is digital versus physical. Well, the prices, in my opinion, are just better on the Steam Deck OLED with all the sales and the games being much cheaper after some time, where on the Nintendo Switch, unfortunately, we have to pay much more for games that are couple of years old that can be gotten on the Steam Deck at a much better price. But then there's another thing, is that this is digital only, where the Nintendo Switch 2 can play physical games. So if you're someone that likes to collect physical, or in my case, someone that likes to have the games physical in case I want to sell them, that means I would probably prefer the Nintendo Switch 2, because for example, if I get the Cyberpunk 2077, it is going to be cheaper on here. I'm not talking about how it runs on both. It's going to be cheaper on the Steam Deck, especially during the sales. But on Nintendo Switch 2, if I don't like it, I can sell it and then just have that little margin of a loss instead of having the game that I paid for and never getting to actually play it because I don't want it or I wanted to sell it. So this is like a give and take. If you're just a digital user and even on Nintendo Switch you're gonna be just buying digital, this is probably a better option for you on the Steam Deck. But if you want those physical, the Nintendo Switch 2 has that option, at least for many of the games. So this is definitely something to consider when you're getting the console. While it is gonna be pricier, you have that option to sell those games back. And because of that, you play the game at a much lower cost. And you have to also consider what you can play on the Steam Deck from the Steam library versus what you can get on the Nintendo Switch 2. While you can play the Cyberpunk and you can play many other games, well, some of the games are just going to run better on the Steam Deck. Also, you have all the games from the Steam library. If there's something on the Steam store that you cannot get on the Nintendo Switch, this is gonna be better. But also, Nintendo has its own first-party games. So if you like those first-party games, the Nintendo Switch 2 is a no-brainer. And if you want the Mario games, Zelda games, this is pretty much like software made for that hardware. Where this is much more for the third-party games and indie games that you can find on the Steam store. So it really is dependent on the user, in my opinion. But for the sheer performance of optimization, the Steam Deck OLED is still holding up really nicely against the Nintendo Switch 2. I feel like just some games are gonna run better, some games are just gonna be available on Nintendo Switch 2, like the Fortnite, which is made for Nintendo Switch 2, which just runs incredibly well on the handheld, which is just not available on the Steam Deck. Also, you can save up on games for the Steam Deck OLED and on subscription and games on Nintendo Switch 2 with Instant Gaming. Instant Gaming is a website where you can find games at a better price than on their regular store. Plenty of times I found games for the Steam Deck OLED at a better price than it was even on sales on the Steam store. And on the Nintendo Switch 2, I got my subscription for it from Instant Gaming. And also, together with Instant Gaming, we're doing a giveaway where one of you can win a game of your choice. So if you're interested in Instant Gaming or the giveaway, check out the links down below. But other than that, I would say it's a much more of a case that one is made for someone else and then the other one is made for someone totally different, while they're both a handheld. But like I said, it made me really appreciate how comfortable and just, how cool this device is, how easy it is to use, and how much of optimization, how much of ergonomics and just thought went into the Valve's Steam Deck OLED. If you have any more questions about these two, let me know in the comment section down below. With that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I hope you guys enjoyed this video once again, and I'll see you next time.